bio. So Erik, welcome.
Yeah, that's what I like to do. I figured out a couple of weeks ago that I'm a little bit past my halfway point, so the age of 64. So, yeah, I got to do cool shit with cool people in the time that's remaining. So my invitation here is I've got about 30 minutes where I'm going to lay out some thoughts, ideas, and you're going to be able to have access to anything that we have here later on. So this is about a story and a relationship. So I want to connect with you here. Hopefully some of the things I will say will strike chords in you, and you know, we can do something about it. You can do something about it. So with that said, I'm going to formally begin. So I'm a mission-driven man. My mission is to, with every breath and every step, I see, create, protect, and play with beauty. And this is one of the beauties that I play with and I work with. And we have many kinds of loving relationships. This is Amelia. She's my business partner and my life partner. She's my friend. She's my warrior sister. And she's my soulmate. And so a lot of my mission is driven and inspired by my relationship with her as a personal representative of the feminine, and she also has masculine energy. We'll get into that. But now in my life, I use my energy to see and protect the feminine. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So, who are we? Well, for this webinar, we are in large part the Kylo mentoring group. That's where we come from. That's our organization, where we are helping people to integrate their egos and their souls. And we'll talk about that some more. So what are the principles by which Amelia and I live? Well, we met at a place called Shalom Mountain Retreat Center, and it was a tantric container. So I want to just briefly go over with you what the tantric principles are. First of all, everything's an experiment. Everything's an experiment. There's no right and wrong. As without in the outside world, so within. So if what's going on in the outside world, there's a parallel in my inside world. As tantric practitioners, we're working on our inner marriage, which is the divine dance of the masculine and the feminine. And the masculine and the feminine is gender free. As women and men, we all have masculine and feminine qualities. There's multiple realities. There's the reality of the personal. There's the reality of the archetypal. There's the reality of the magical. I'm not going to get into that so much at the moment, and there's also tapas and spanda, a container, and from a container comes things new, and you have to create strong containers. And there's ascending and descending energy that goes through the 7 chakras, and then ultimately, and most importantly, is the healing power of pleasure. So our practice is helping people to identify their unique selves, and do that through pleasure. So what do we do with people? This is the something that is central to our practice. We want people who come to us to get as close to the purple here, to be able to do what they love, do what they're good at, do what they can be paid for, and not what the world needs. So I'd ask you, as we're doing this, just reflect for a moment inside yourself. How are you doing right now relative to that? Because what I'm going to do in laying out the 12 forms of capital is lay out some ways in which perhaps you can get there. All right, so I'm going to get to the 12 forms of capital in a second, but I need to tell my story just a little bit, because it's an important why they were important to me. About 6 years ago, I was let go from a job. My contract wasn't renewed for no reason, because I didn't get along with the boss, and I told him the truth. And when he said he wasn't renewing my contract, I said, "Why? What's the performance reason?" And he said, "There is no performance reason. I just don't want to renew it." And that triggered a whole series of events. I've had 5 or 6 deep depressions in my life. And what I know now from each one of those deep depressions is I had to go there. And I had to go there because I had to work through some of the story of my life. And the story of my life, plain and simple, is I'm a son of Swedish immigrant and a brilliant woman. Grew up in the Midwest, and my father came to the United States to become a millionaire, and he became a millionaire when I was 8 years old. And he loved a lot of things, including what you're looking at right now, horseback riding. And when I was 13 years old, he bought a boat. And that's Hermia. And Hermia, I learned an incredible amount about leadership, teamwork on Hermia, because we sailed it around Europe. We raced in ocean races in incredible storms. And I learned a lot about about situational leadership. And when you're in a storm in a boat like that, with that big sail there, which is smaller in a storm when the wind's 65 miles an hour, one person gives the command and everybody jumps. There's a time and place for it. And I learned a lot from my father, but growing up, moving to a mansion when I was 8 years old, being driven in limousines, getting to ski in helicopters, sailing yachts, riding horses. I lived a life of an incredible privilege, and I didn't have anything to do with that. So, in a sense, the depressions in my life, I think, were about me learning about my own agency. And you know, I'm pretty agentic at this point. I think a lot of people would say, but 5 years ago, after losing this job, I retreated to a cabin in Vermont that I had built for $1,800 and sort of gave up. my agency for a while, and I was in nature, and I immediately began, the minute I moved there, I could sleep. I began to connect with the trees and the nature around me, and I was introduced by a friend who was into permaculture into the 8 forms of capital at that point. Now, I'm the kind of person that takes something and uses it. The work that I do, that we do, is very much a process. It's a living process. So even 6 weeks ago, it was the 10 forms of capital until I went to my men's group, and they gave me feedback, and it made sense to create the 12 forms of capital. So I am going to now, can you see that? Can you, I don't see it quite vividly. So at 1 o'clock is temporal capital. The most precious capital you have. It is it's your time on this planet. And now at the age of 64, I'm extremely aware of the amount of time I have left, and I want to use it well. So that's why I want to do cool shit with cool people till I do my last exhalation, if I have that much control over things. So how do people use their time? How do you use your time? I'm a clinical psychologist. I see people numbing themselves out all the time. They're not now. And that's a choice they make. But there's a lot of encouragement in our society to numb out. Second one, physical health. I think that seems obvious. There's a lot of complexity in that. There's many measures of it. People can work on their physical health. Obviously, one of the most important things in terms of your physical health is exercising, is breathing, is what you eat. But last I know, this body, I need to take care of it, because that's what my ego gets to go around with. And since we are about integrating ego and soul, and I won't go into soul, that can be anything for a lot of people. But for me, this ego is working on riding with its soul, and I need it to work. Emotional resilience, formerly called emotional intelligence, has 5 qualities or not more. You have to learn to manage yourself. You have to know yourself. You have to manage yourself. You have to know and empathize with others. And you have to manage your relationships with others. And ultimately, you have to motivate yourself. What's your agency? What are you doing in the world? Those are the qualities. And we'll go into that a little bit more. The next one is intimacy, and next one is community. I took social capital and I broke that out because for me, and what I've noticed is that intimate relationships with friends and for me, with Amelia at this point, my intimate relationship with her just interacts with my emotional resilience. All these capitals can interact with each other in various different ways. But the eye cannot see itself. I cannot see myself. And Amelia gives me feedback on who I am as a man. And since I'm a tantrika, I want her to have pleasure. I want her to be radiant. And if you know Amelia, she's pretty radiant. But when she doesn't like something, she lets me know. And that's a cue for me to listen. Maybe it's something based on her history, but maybe it's my behavior. I need to modify my behavior because she makes me a better man. That's part of my relationship. And so do my friends. My group of men help me to be a better man. And community, I grew up in a place where there was no, my parents' community was worldwide. They didn't relate to the community around. But if we're going to be resilient, you got to know the people next to you. You know, they might not necessarily be your friends, but for example, when I was in Vermont during the hurricane, Vermont experience of the hurricane and the destruction of the hurricane was very different from New Orleans. All the neighbors got together with various different heavy equipment, and they put the roads that had been destroyed back together. And they were pretty much put together so people could move around before the government even showed up. So community is an incredibly important part of resilience. Knowledge capital is, and I realize I should probably do this for a moment. I'm gonna just let you see me for a moment. Knowledge capital used to be called intellectual capital, and intellectual knowledge, if it's not applied in the world, as far as I'm concerned, is relatively useless. So that's why I use knowledge. You know, I can know things, I can have information, but if I'm not applying that in some way, then for me, it's not so useful. Financial capital, you know all about. That's what we focus on. That's what's considered capital. That's what's considered wealth. We see the ramifications of that in our society right now. And I'll leave you to think about what it's like when we just focus on money. I just see destruction all over the place when we just focus on money. And I spend a lot of time with a guy called Chris Martinson, who has a website, Peak Prosperity. And his belief, as the belief of everyone, the 12 men who are in my men's group, is that we are at some point going to be entering times like none of us have ever seen. And we want to be prepared for that. And we're not preparers in the traditional way. We want to be connected with each other. We want to have resource. And I could probably go on for hours about that, but I won't at the moment. Material capital is something that's become very important to me because I own far less than I did 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I've given it away. Amelia and I live extremely simply. The material I have in my life is either beautiful or useful. Otherwise, it's gone. So I have a lot of tools. We have beautiful things. I actually have more things here in this office than we have where we live. And why is that? Because the material we own, to some degree, owns us. We have to manage it. And I don't want to have to manage a lot of things. And that's me. And I didn't say this before. I'm offering you, to some degree, my story and how I relate to this. But how you do in your life as you go through these things, if you find them valuable, that's up to you. That's your story. I'm not holding myself up as in any way as the way people should be. It's the way I should be as I'm trying to be my best self. Living capital, we can have a little example of living capital here. That's the living capital that work on shiitake mushroom log. I had a bunch of people who came over to where we live, and we injected shiitake mushroom logs. And about 3 days ago, Amelia saw 4 shiitake mushrooms growing, and she was all excited. And we went out and harvested them and had them for breakfast. And living capital is that nature around us. It's the river, it's nature, it's trees, it's gardens. They're bounteous, and it's fun to take care of living capital. I did shiitake mushroom logs. I was going to create bees, but too much came up, so I couldn't get bees because I wanted to see the way bees behave. Cultural capital. There's a lot to cultural capital, but I want to be part of a culture of people who have some common values and draw those values that are value from the past and create new manifestations of those values in the present. And it's an important part of any organization or any family. What's the culture, and what part of the culture is conscious and what part of it is unconscious. And then spiritual capital. In some way, we have to explain what happens to us, why we're born and why we die. Fortunately for me, my parents were Unitarians, and they said, you can figure that out in your own life, and I have. And what gives meaning to my life, what legacy I want to live, how I explain what to me is heaven and hell on this earth, that's all part of that. And then finally, up at the top, again, I'll show it to you, is pleasure. And pleasure, people associate pleasure with the sensory world. That's not how we explain it in our practice. Yes, of course, there's sensory pleasure in food and skin and all those things that are wonderful. But there's also the pleasure of friendship and the pleasure of community. And the highest form of pleasure, perhaps, I don't know the truth, I have my truth. The highest form of pleasure is being seen for who you really are by the people around you and people in the world around you. That's pleasure. So there's many different forms of pleasure. So, temporal capital, I'm going to go into 4 of the capitals just briefly. I spend a lot of time on temporal capital. I sit in nature for 2.5 hours every morning. Amelia and I are off the grid at least 12 hours a day. Nothing coming in from the grid. Because I want to be able to use my time to know myself inside and what's coming through, rather than continuously reacting to, news reports and stuff like that, and fear-based stuff where people make money on creating fear. So how do you use your time? And how do you allocate your time to these other forms of capital? One of the things I forgot to mention as we use the 12 forms of capital is we help people to develop a strategic life plan from that. There's a short-term plan and a long-term plan. What are you trying? What are you wanting to have in your life in these other forms of capital? Frankly, in terms of housing, a little tiny house is a fine thing for me. I don't need any more than that. Yeah, how do you invest your precious life? Because the temporal capital is the capital that is presumed is getting less all the time, and I don't know when. So I try and live by the warrior credo. It's a good day to die. I don't want to die today. I don't want to die today. But when I die, if I can observe myself going out, I want to make sure that I've lived my life as fully as possible on this day. Emotional resilience, also known as emotional intelligence previously, and I like emotional resilience better. If I'm a master in anything, it's probably in working on this one with people, 30,000 hours plus working with people, being with them, being with their pain. And on the other side of their pain is their pleasure on who they are. And I know that on the other side of pain is who you are. And how people become emotionally resilient is there's many pathways. You know, it starts with breathing. And it involves looking at your shadow through others, so who reflect you, because the eye cannot see itself, and learning about yourself and who you are. And, you know, Jung talked about individuation. Well, we don't really begin to individuate until we're about 40. And emotional resilience is a lot about breaking out of familiar patterns, family patterns, and enculturated patterns to be who we are. Because I believe in the depths of my heart and the depths of my soul that we are all unique, and that's true. And we're here to be that. And that uniqueness, you know, in my view, is that we are all unique manifestations of the divine, and that's our job to do. And we need help. And that's what a good friend is. That's what a lover is. And I could talk for 4 hours about emotional resilience, but and intimacy. Into me you see. Into me you see. It's hard to be emotionally resilient if you don't have an intimate relationship, for the reasons that I just stated. And you know, I see a lot of pain. I see a lot in marriages and stuff, of people having transactional relationships. You know, you got to do this, you got to do that, we got to get the groceries and stuff like that. And I see less time with people in so-called intimate relationships, setting the container, setting aside the time to just truly be with each other and find out of each other and tell the truth, right? The way Amelia and I define love is we tell each other the truth, and we serve as catalysts to each other to be our best selves, our most unique selves, our most authentic selves. And that's our job with each other. That's how we define love. As a psychologist, you know, I just hear people coming in and talking about love this and this is love that, and that's part of a whole excuse me familiar pattern or enculturated pattern about love. So, you know, for me, everybody's got to define what love is. Amelia and I have drawn from a Lakota tradition of different kinds of loving relationships. And as I said before, she's my friend, and she's my warrior sister, and she's my teacher, and I'm her student, and she's my student, and she's my soulmate, and she's my courtesan. And what we try and do is get clear about which role we're playing in any given moment. And, you know, there's all sorts of finesse stuff that's important to happen there. Living capital. To me, it's important. For me, the shiitake mushroom logs are really important to me, because it's a way I use logs, oak logs, and create something new. And those shiitake mushroom logs, if all go well, will be just blooming once or twice a year with shiitake mushrooms for 3 or 4 years. And I get to delight Amelia, and I get to delight friends. And that's how I do living capital. I'm sort of more of a warrior, masculine energy. So gardening is just a little tedious for me. It takes too much attention. So I'm more of a hunter, and I can, in the way I relate to plants and stuff, I'll give you a good start, then you're on your own. And finally, pleasure. It's a really different orientation in life when you orient towards moving towards pleasure than away from pain. And as a psychologist, I've done that for most of my career. I would be considered a positive psychologist, or moving people towards goals. And coaches do this and stuff like, where do you want to go? But we really use pleasure. So I'm asking my clients and the people around me what's going to give you pleasure. And even as Amelia and I were preparing for this, and there's a lot of stuff going on right now because we're building our business and stuff like that, you know, I said, so what's going to give you pleasure today? And she said, she told me, and I said, well, you go do that. And she went to cafe and spent time with a friend, and she came back all energized and, you know, helped me put some stuff together that takes me forever on a computer in no time whatsoever. So that's a brief introduction to this. Hopefully something has teased you and you want to know more.